Stephan walked into a room filled with Seattle's wealthiest families, the parents of the kids of the city's elite academic program. He was there to ask them for money for his public school board campaign. And then he called that program racist. What happened next is what real leadership looks like and sounds like. Not a title, not an election win. It's the courage not only to speak truth to power, but to stay grounded enough in your shared humanity when they react. Stephan is connected with something that's bigger than any given moment. The next generation. I'm Kristina Katayama, and this is Grounded Engagement, Liberating Leadership, and this is Stephan Blanford. See how you are.
Doing okay. It's always a busy time as we're preparing for this festival, which will be my first.
Yeah.
But getting some good press. I got a really interesting article that was done on me that was published earlier this week. I'll send it to you because it might actually inform our conversation.
Yeah.
So I'll get it to you.
So many things, Stephan.
Oh.
You are an extraordinary leader, right? You step into organizations when it's hard, like hard, and with purpose and digging in, you turn it around, right? And so maybe we can just back up a little bit, and I'll just start with just a couple of questions to see what comes up.
Okay.
So tell me about something that you're working on right now that you're really excited about.
Well, I've been in the role of executive director of Earshot Jazz for 7 months, coming up on 8 months now. And the primary thing we do is put on the jazz festival in the fall, in October. And as someone who's attended as a jazz fan the festival for a number of years, I'm very excited to be behind the scenes, helping to organize and put together a jazz festival. And I'm very conscious of the fact that my predecessor had been in the role for 32 years. And so there was a little bit of anxiety with taking on this new challenge and having responsibility for organizing it when there was someone who had done it for years, could do it in his sleep. So there's a lot of excitement and anxiety, and there's more than a fair amount of just wonderment at how my life has gotten me from a place of sitting in the audience to being behind the scenes, actually delivering the product.
So what I'd like to hear about is your leadership journey. Like, take us on a journey through, if you were offering, I see it this way, like if you're speaking to people who would like to become leaders, right? Tell us about your leadership journey and what it is that makes you the leader that you are today.
Wow, that's a huge question. And when you first started to prompt it, it made me think back to my first leadership experiences, which were as a little kid, fifth grader. I was elected president of my fifth grade class. And I think that came in large measure, not that I'd known the kids that I was in school with, because my dad was in the military and we moved quite frequently, and we had been in the community for about a year. But I remember several of my classmates and a couple of teachers saying we were going to have elections, and my classmates saying, you should run for that. You should do that. And teachers encouraging me to do so, and feeling really inspired to help the classroom and the school at that time. And throughout my future years in K-12, there were a number of times where I was offered leadership responsibility, and I would frequently take it, driven by the idea that I wasn't comfortable with the status quo and I wanted to add some value through my leadership. Being a scholar of MLK, and feeling some responsibility to change things by being in the fight, and that has served me well in the rest of K-12, throughout college, and into my career. Being willing to say yes when offers come because of just a desire to want to contribute and to not be comfortable with the status quo.
What Stephan didn't mention at the beginning of this conversation, and what stopped me when he said it after we finished recording, is actually where Stephan's story begins.
The barriers that we erect that keep kids from being successful. I don't think I've told you, I started kindergarten as a special ed kid. I was enrolled in special ed.
No.
Yep.
Started in special ed. Ended up writing language for the Washington State Supreme Court. That's not an accident. That's what happens when someone refuses the label and refuses to stop. Yeah, and so I hear the other side of it, right, is both the invitation and then your own internal experience. And you said, not being okay with the status quo, wanting to affect change. And so there's a lot of things that we people are not satisfied with at any given time.
Right.
But choosing to engage in a way to initiate or make change or lead others in a more complex process to affect change is a totally different thing. So say more about that. Like, when did you know, or what was the moment that you felt called or compelled to respond to something that you were dissatisfied with in a way to engage in change?
How I'd respond to that is I think very clearly about one day that I was sitting on the dais at the school board, having been elected 2 or 3 years before, and we were having this rich debate on a initiative that would have directly addressed our opportunity gaps, which at the time were one of the largest opportunity gaps of any urban district in the nation, right? So not a small thing, a pretty significant shift to say, we're going to be explicit about identifying a population of students that, overall have been low performing, and we're going to direct resources and attention to increase their academic achievement. And I remember sitting on the dais, having made the arguments for why we needed to do this, arguments about targeted universalism, arguments about all children deserve, and when there are children that are underserved, they deserve more, right? Having made those arguments and hearing from some of my colleagues who were in opposition to that notion, who saw their kids getting benefit and wanting to advocate for more benefits for their children, right? And so I remember sitting on the dais and being really struck by, does my participation as a Black man, and at that time the only Black person on the school board, does it validate the board? Does it give me the entree to speak my truth to power? But does it also validate this decision, which could have gone in the opposite direction that I wanted, right? And what is the cost, both to me personally and to the organization, by participating in this debate, which shouldn't have even been a debate, right? But the fact that that I was going to be a part of it, and that it could have gone in the opposite direction that I wanted it to. But then the cost is borne by me for even participating. And ultimately, in most aspects of my life, and I think King and the civil rights protesters and all the people who were involved, they serve as a really clear model for the idea that if you want change to happen, you have to be part of that change happening. I talked to lots of people. I've spoken to lots of people over the years who are unwilling to engage in struggles for civil rights or for school or whatever the issue is, because they know they're in a system that is stacked up against them. And I, I, I don't subscribe to that belief. I believe that we, to use the words of one of my heroes, Derek Bell, who's one of the founders of critical race theory, he talks about the fact that we're better human beings because we fight against something, even if we don't stand to win. We get closer to our own humanity as people because we're willing to struggle and not just be oppressed because the odds are stacked against us. I subscribe to that notion. I believe that really clearly, and it guides my own leadership as a result.
Thank you. Can you give me an example of a moment when you experienced that yourself, that engaging in the struggle strengthened you as a leader, regardless of the outcome or the odds being stacked?
Well, I think, staying on the school board theme, I'm a much better leader because of the 4 years that I spent on the school board. I am much more conscious of and cognizant of the power of community. I feel much more strongly about and am willing to engage in rigorous debate with people who disagree, and to challenge them to articulate how their anti-equity, anti-community arguments, how they can actually make sense of them. Like, I get some satisfaction out of challenging people to articulate why they take the positions that they do, because I don't believe that those positions are based in care for other human beings. And I feel like my administrative abilities are stronger. My connection to community is stronger. And I'm empowered, or I've become more passionate about the things that I care about as a result of taking on some of those leadership responsibilities.
Okay. So I'm hearing the result of your experience, right? Your connection with community, your administrative skills getting stronger. And what I'm looking for is, what's a galvanizing moment that like that awakened that in you? There was before your connection with community, or before maybe even you knew what administrative skills were. I don't know. Right. And then something happened and it's still with you and it shaped you and formed you as a leader.
Yeah. Maybe the most galvanizing moment for me was on the campaign trail. You have to, even though it's a school board race, you have to raise money in order to run a campaign, to pay for yard signs and staff to help with all of the work. And I had, when I announced my candidacy, I had a number of people, both friends and people that I had never met before, that said, yeah, you should be on the school board and I'll do whatever I can to help you. In this case, in the case that I'm thinking about, really good friend of mine got in touch with a friend of hers that has a really nice place not far from Lake Washington. And they decided that they were going to host a party where I would come and speak. And at the end of the conversation, I would ask for money and people would write checks and all of that. And I didn't know the third party, didn't know where she lived. I got the address. I showed up. And as I'm walking in, I'm like, wow, this is a pretty nice place. I've never been in this neighborhood and surely haven't been in this space. And as I walked in, I realized that I was talking to the upper crust of Seattle, talking to people who had invested their children's education in Seattle public schools, for which I was grateful, but had a very different take on what the priorities of Seattle public schools should be. And so I'm giving my talk, and I mentioned the fact that through my analysis, and I have a doctorate in education, so I spend a lot of time researching Seattle public schools before I decided to run. One of the things I saw was that the highly capable program for Seattle public schools has almost no, has a very limited number of children of color. And so I made the statement in my speech, because I'm just riffing. I didn't have a speech prepared, but was just kind of talking about the things that I saw as important. And I called the highly capable program racist, just given the fact that very few children of color were enrolled in the program. And when I said that, and there was a woman in the audience that was incensed and got in my face immediately, didn't allow me to finish my thoughts, but was in my face about how can you call me racist and how can you call my kid who is enrolled in the program racist. And, it was a very awkward moment, given the fact that I was there to raise money to fund my campaign. And realizing very quickly that most of the parents who were in that place were parents of highly capable kids enrolled in the highly capable program. And so in the moment, in real time, I'm trying to figure out what's my response. And I just let out. I said, I didn't call you racist and I didn't call your kid racist. I said, the program is racist. I believe that there is the disparity between kids of color and white kids when it comes to their capabilities, their academic capabilities. There should not be the disparity that you see as a result of this. And I said, I want to talk to you to understand what that is. But I came away from that conversation, which went reasonably well. Before it was over, we found some measure of compromise. But I remember coming home and just thinking to myself, that to walk into a room, a hostile environment, and be able to speak my truth and to not back down from that truth is, in my mind, is the definition of leadership. There's no shortage of situations, even today, that I'm on a phone call and it would be easy to make compromise in order to make the other person feel good. But to me, leadership is standing true to what you believe in, being willing to engage with other people, and being humble enough to recognize that you don't have a monopoly on all the knowledge, but to be willing to stand firm when socially it may cost you something. And in my mind, that was a really good example of the challenge of compromise versus standing firm.
So many questions. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. I really appreciate it. I can feel it, right? So many questions. I'm curious about kind of two things. One is, who were your leaders, mentors, or a moment, right, that allowed you to speak your truth in this space, right? First of all, because there's so many moments when we don't say the things that are here for us to say, right? And sometimes there's a really good reason for that. I just want to say that.
Right.
And in this moment, you chose, this is the time for me to speak to this. And what gave you the resource, if you will, the internal resource, the relational resource? I'm not even sure. Like, what is the resource that allowed, that you connected with, to speak freely in that moment?
It may sound cliche, but I've mentioned before that I'm the father, or I'm the child of a military father. And I come from a family where many members of the family got out of generational poverty in the South, in the Deep South, by enlisting in the military. I have an uncle who won a Congressional Medal of Honor, which is the highest award that a soldier can win. The award was actually given to his wife by the Vice President of the United States. And he won that award because he, in Vietnam, in 1968 or 69, I forget the date actually, was leading a group of men, and someone threw a grenade into the bunker that they were in. And without a moment's hesitation, he jumped threw his body onto the grenade, which blew him up, but saved all the men who were there. And they have dedicated their lives, many of them, to remembering my uncle, Clifford C. Sims, who is recognized on the Vietnam Veterans Wall. And also there's an exhibit at the African American Museum of Art, Smithsonian African American Museum of Art, that recognizes my uncle for that act of sacrifice. And my cousins and I have spent a lot of time thinking about the example that he gave to us in that moment when he, I'm sure he wasn't living a wonderful life at that moment, but he made the ultimate sacrifice and showed bravery beyond what anyone can imagine. And so I think a lot about his example, and I think, what can I do to live up to the example that my uncle set? And that, in a very, in no way commensurate with what he did in making that ultimate sacrifice, is just, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm not going to be scared. I'm going to recognize who I am and where I come from and what community I belong to, and I'm going to represent wherever I can the interests and needs of that community. I may not get it right, and there's a feedback loop where people tell me, "Oh, you're not really on point on this," but by and large, I think a lot about what he tells me to do, and he's on my shoulder all the time, saying, "Go boldly into that meeting. Don't, um, don't compromise here, or stand firm there, or lead there." And I think that served me well over the years in the many different situations that I've been in.
Thank you. Wow. Also feel that, like I need to just take a breath right there. I'm thinking about the community connections. I'm thinking about the relationship with this group of people, even the person who was the most vocal about how she was feeling, and how they responded to this request to engage or think about education, children, the use of resources in a different way than maybe anyone had ever asked them to before.
Right.
So I'm very curious about that.
Yeah. I would love to say that everyone that went to that fundraising event thought differently about their participation in the highly capable program, but that's not the way that it works. Um, what I took away from it was a maybe fearlessness, a strong desire to see some change happen. I came to realize, so I win the election, I raised enough money to win the election, and then I get to help make policy around the highly capable program. And me and a few other board members continued to call out the fact that it was inequitable, that we have in Seattle, we have the largest number of kids that are enrolled in a highly capable program, and the percentage of kids that are enrolled in highly capable is way out of proportion to other cities and other school districts around the state, right? And to understand why that is, and to publicize and talk about why that is. The primary reason that it is that way is not because Seattle has a disproportionate number of really brilliant kids. It is because some parents are able to pay for testing that demonstrates that their kids are eligible for the highly capable program. And that means that there are some providers out there providing that testing that are willing to take their money and give the kid a positive result. It does not mean that, that we've got 20% of all the kids in Seattle public schools are white kids and they are eligible for that program. And so just by being able to bring an analytical lens and be able to understand why we have these numbers and why they don't actually make sense was really important in pushing for some reforms to the way that kids are tested, to the way that they're placed in the program, and to the alternatives that some kids would get, because not all parents want their kids in highly capable program. My child was eligible to be in it, and we chose not to put her in the program because we knew that she would, have to encounter a lot of racist thoughts. And so we opted not to put her in that program, but there were lots of other parents that we encountered that felt the same way. And so just by bringing together the passion, the knowledge that it is wrong, that fundamentally there's something wrong about how that program was set up, and then to be able to persist in arguing how it could be changed and made better and more representative of Seattle's student population is something I take a lot of pride in.
Great. Thank you. So tell me about another moment. So we moved from the 5th grade into being on the board for Seattle Public Schools, right? And now we're here, and whatever the journey was from then till now, give me another galvanizing leadership development moment in your path.
Surely the time in between those two, school board and then where I am currently, where you and I met was during my time as the executive director of Children's Alliance, the statewide children's advocacy organization. And I had lots of opportunities for leadership moments in that time. One that resonates most profoundly for me was early in my time there, we helped to author what's called the Fair Start for Kids Act, which was a significant investment in early learning for Washington State's children, young children. The idea of making that investment, one, was because it was a pandemic and parents needed to go back to work, and we didn't have a children's early learning system in Washington State that could accommodate all these parents that needed to go back to work and all these kids that needed a place to be. And so we made significant investments in that. That was immediately challenged by wealthy people who would have had to pay the tax that funded those additional slots. And the case went to the state Supreme Court, and I got to be in the audience as arguments were being made back and forth, one of which was an argument that I made that was part of a amicus brief that was submitted to the Supreme Court, and was thrilled when, in announcing their decision, a 7-2 decision upholding the tax, they used language that I had actually written on my laptop, which was pretty inspiring for someone who has watched politics for a long time, watched policy being made, and to know that words that I conceived in my brain, typed through my fingers, actually informed the decision and was cited in the decision, felt pretty inspiring. That case wasn't done, though, because in Washington State, you can take any decision and put it on the ballot. And so it actually was on the ballot in 2024. And I was invited, encouraged to go around the state and talk to groups of people, to potential voters, to editorial boards for newspapers and magazines, to go on TV, to debate the opposition, and talk directly in conversation with people who stood to have to pay the tax and were opposed to it. I can remember debating down in Olympia a guy who had to pay the tax and didn't want to, and wanted to have it defeated. And we were going back and forth with a TV camera in our faces. And I was making the argument that an investment in the state's children had all these benefits, not only for the children, but for their families and communities as a whole and state as a whole. And he was making what I thought were very self-interested arguments about, I've made this money, why are you taking it away from me? And the moment that I'm thinking of is the moment when we saw the results of the election in November, and they were overwhelmingly in favor of the position that we had taken. And for me, as the child of two parents who didn't graduate from high school, not because they weren't smart, but because there wasn't a high school in their community that served them, for me as a person who's experienced poverty myself. My family had its struggles and went through a lot of trauma, but to get to a place where I got to have that type of influence, not for my child, because my child by that time was getting ready for college, but for a whole lot of children that I've never met, but that will have a chance to potentially follow and do big things like I have had the blessing to be able to do. To me, that was incredibly satisfying, and it was a reward for all the people who have invested in my growth and my potential to be able to advocate for more pathways to be open for kids that would otherwise not have them. Was very inspiring. Anyone who's interested, anyone who is wondering how to get to their dreams, how to have agency in their lives, I want them to hear that story. I spent so much of my life not having agency, not knowing how to make change happen in the world, and not believing that I had the capability of making change. And, some of those formative experiences that I had that I've talked about in fifth grade, being president of my class, subtly taught me that I have agency. I have the ability to change the conditions that affect my life. And I think a lot of people, when they have that realization, turn it towards making money, having, taking care of their family. And I surely have done those things. My financial status is much different than it was when I started out. But very quickly, I realized that wasn't the calling wasn't for that, for me to line my pockets. It was for me, with the recognition that my mom and dad didn't graduate from high school because there wasn't a high school. So what can I do to ensure that no one has to experience that, coming up to the dead end of educational promise, running up against disinvestment from society, which is what they experienced. What can I do to ensure that kids have opportunity to reach their potential? And even now, what can I do to ensure that people have access to the music that I love, and I think many of them they love, right? I just wish that I had a megaphone to call out to people like me in society who are kind of stuck in a place, to realize you have a lot more agency than you realize. You have the ability to change your life. We could talk about how you make a plan to make incremental progress on that desire to have agency. We could talk about how mentors have informed my life and changed the trajectory of my life. Can talk about how important it is to spend time really thinking or meditating or getting right with yourself, with your own mental state, so that you can grow to the next place. All of those are really important, but at the root of it, I think what I think you're trying to get to is, for me, is just flipping the switch and realizing that if my life was going to change and my community's life was going to change, I had a role to play in flipping that switch and embracing that, rather than being hesitant to do it. Like really taking the opportunity to flip the switch and change the trajectory of my life.
When is there a moment that you found the switch?
For me, my moment was when I decided to leave my family, who were all in Colorado, and move to Seattle. And I think about it frequently. I got in my car, had a little bit of money. I can't believe the little bit that I had in a car that was not very good. And I drove to Seattle over the course of 3 days. And during that time, in addition to listening to lots of music, I spent a lot of time just watching the landscape roll by, but I spent more time thinking about what I wanted to be when I got to Seattle. And I had spent 3 days in Seattle before, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, didn't have very much money, um, but I knew um, that Seattle was going to be a place that I could make my way. And I think about it frequently, how lucky, fortunate, uh, blessed by Providence I was to have that actually play out as it did. Um, it really changed the trajectory of my life to a very different place. And I don't know for your listeners what that moment is for them, but to embrace it, to really spend time thinking about who you are and who you want to be, and then to act on it, to not just think all these high thoughts and then let them just evaporate, but to really craft a plan and start executing on that plan.
One thing that I know that really helps, and you've shared so many stories, and I really appreciate that. And I'm thinking about the title of this podcast, right, which is Grounded Engagement, Liberating Leadership. And when I hear your stories, I hear stories of liberating leadership over and over, right? Liberating when you talk about agency, for example, right? And if there's a message, like I'm thinking about, is there a moment where there was doubt or unsure, or, that a listener might be able to connect into and relate to? Uh, um, and then so you just shared the one about moving. Like, what is that from your family in Colorado to on your own in Seattle? What is it that, like, happened right before that moment that you made the decision and got in your car that, like, liberated you, right? And what were you being liberated from?
Yeah. I don't know that there was a specific moment, but I do remember very clearly being in a place where I had graduated from school and couldn't get work that was commensurate with what I believed I should be doing. And I remember getting to a point where I went to a temporary place where you could get day labors. And I got assigned that day and probably made $10 and was out in the broiling sun and was sweeping a construction site. And I have all the respect in the world for anyone that's in that situation. But I said to myself, this is lost on you. This is not a good use of your time and your expertise and your aspiration for who you should be. And I think it was shortly thereafter that I started researching Seattle and deciding, I think I'm going to try my luck there. And what I take from that is things had gotten pretty bad. I had graduated from college. I expected that I was going to be moving up in the professional world, and was so detoured away from that it was very clear to me that either this was going to be my life or I was going to have to make a big fundamental change. I look at it now and I just think, you're not that brave. It's pretty crazy that you decided you were going to move halfway across the world, or halfway across the United States, not know anybody, and still make a go at it. And so things lined up, but you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And I think when it comes to leadership, leaders find themselves in those precarious positions where they may lose their job, but they have to speak their truth, right? They have to say something that's uncomfortable to a community or to someone that has power, right? And I think ultimately, if you have some measure of confidence and comfort in who you are, it makes it easier to say those things and live with the consequences of your choices. I tell everyone that I mentor or spend time talking with, that ask me questions about how I've gotten to the places that I've gotten to. I say you have to be true to who you are, and then you have to live with the consequences of those choices, right? But more frequently than not, being able to speak truth to power has positive consequences, and that, when combined with persistence, in the short term, may set you back, but ultimately is going to advance you to hopefully to a position of more power and authority, because you are speaking on behalf of a ton of people who have not been invited to those conversations.
Got it. Thank you. That's one thing that I hear over and over again in what you're saying, is this deep sense of greater good that you have, this deep sense of serving a community, greater good, a future that you may or may not directly benefit from, and yet you're all in.
Yeah.
Over and over. I hear that. Yeah.
There's a leadership program that I participated in that the theme of it is, as leaders, we plant seeds for trees that we may never sit under. But it's important to plant those seeds regardless. And, my experience has been, whether I talk to someone who is interested in mentorship, or I was talking the other day to a woman whose kid is enrolled in the Seattle preschool program that I helped to push while I was on the school board. And, over and over again, I get to see those trees and have great, just so much gratitude to my parents and all the people, including you, by the way, who helped me to get to these positions and helped to steel my spine when I had difficult choices to make and to act on. So many conversations that I've had with, my family members, with my executive coach, you, about difficult choices that needed to be made. And you've been helpful in helping me to think through, is my analysis right? Am I looking at all the options? And holding me accountable. You said you were going to do blah, blah, blah. Did you actually do it? That I think is so critically important for anyone that's aspiring to a leadership role. And if I could say one thing really quickly, in this conversation, it's easy to think about someone being a sanctioned leader, having the title of leader, executive director, or in my case, board member, or whatever else. But so much of leadership I have found is from the unsanctioned leader, the person who is in community and sees something that's wrong and is willing to say something about it, right? That person is a leader, and not necessarily the person that gets elected or the person that has a title or whatever. And so how important it is to encourage leadership at all levels of systems that need change, to me, is an important point to make.
Absolutely. That is what this is all about, right? Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephan. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and all of the stories that you shared. It's really sitting with me, in particular, like your internal resources to be able to stand up and speak your truth to power.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm always thrilled when I get a chance to talk about the very circuitous path that I've taken to get to where I am now.
Great. Well, this is Grounded Engagement, Liberating Leadership, and I'm Kristina Katayama. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What stays with me from this conversation is something Stephan said almost in passing. That leaders plant seeds for trees they will never sit under. His parents didn't graduate from high school, not because they weren't capable, but because there wasn't one in the community that served them. Stephan started kindergarten and special ed. No one could have predicted Dr. Blanford. And yet he spent 5 years on a school board, wrote language that went into a Supreme Court decision, debated on television, and helped win a ballot measure for children he will never meet. Children who now have access to early learning that didn't exist before he showed up, risked saying something many didn't want to hear, and called for engagement fueled by purpose. That's not sacrifice. That's investment in a future that belongs to someone else. The question he left me with is this: where are we being called to speak something true? And what are we building for the people who aren't in the room yet? This is Kristina Katayama, Grounded Engagement, Liberating Leadership.